Right now, meteorologists in Kuala Lumpur have something active warnings out across the majority of Malaysia's states at the same time, from the northern beaches of Kedah all the way to the rainforests of Sarawak and Sabah on the other side of the South China Sea. Thunderstorms producing more than 20 millimeters of rain an hour, wind gusts strong enough to snap branches and down power lines, and this isn't a one-off. It's the latest in a pattern that has repeated itself again and again through July and into August, hitting different combinations of states almost every single week. For a country that sits so close to the equator, that rarely deals with the kind of tropical cyclones that batter the Philippines or Japan, this level of sustained, widespread, severe weather deserves a closer look. Today, we're breaking down exactly what's triggering these warnings, why Malaysia's geography usually protects it from the storms that devastate its neighbors, and why that protection isn't as absolute as most people assume. No exaggeration, no invented threat, just what the data actually shows. If you want to stay ahead of severe weather stories like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications. A thumbs up helps this reach more people across the region who need accurate weather information. Let's get into it. On the afternoon of August 1st, 2026, the Malaysian Meteorological Department, known locally as Met Malaysia, issued a thunderstorm warning covering an extraordinary stretch of the country. The alert, released at 3:45 in the afternoon and valid until 7 p.m., covered districts across Perak, Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang, and Selangor, along with Kuala Lumpur itself, Putrajaya, Negeri Sembilan, Johor, and reaching all the way across the South China Sea to Sarawak and Sabah on the island of Borneo. That is not a localized weather event. That is a warning that, in some form, touched nearly every corner of the country simultaneously, from the peninsula to East Malaysia, within a single afternoon. To understand why Met Malaysia issues a warning like this, it helps to know the specific criteria the department works from. A thunderstorm warning in Malaysia isn't issued simply because clouds are building or rain is expected. It's issued when meteorologists have specific signs that a thunderstorm capable of producing rainfall exceeding 20 millimeters per hour is either imminent or expected to persist for more than an hour. These alerts are deliberately short-term, typically valid for no more than 6 hours, because Malaysia's tropical storms tend to develop and intensify extremely fast, sometimes going from a clear sky to a violent downpour within 30 minutes, as towering cumulonimbus clouds build rapidly in the country's hot, humid, unstable atmosphere. And this wasn't an isolated event. Just 2 weeks earlier, on July 18th, Met Malaysia issued a nearly identical warning, this time covering 5 states including the entirety of Perlis in the north, the island of Langkawi, parts of Perak, sections of Selangor, and a sweeping stretch of Sarawak covering districts including Sri Aman, Betong, Sarkay, Sibu, Muka, Kapit, Bintulu, Miri, and Limbang, alongside parts of Sabah including Sipitang, Tenom, Kuala Penyu, Beaufort, Keningau, Tabunan, the West Coast, and Kudat. Go back further and the pattern holds. Earlier alerts through the summer covered 10 separate states in a single warning, spanning from Kedah and Perak in the north down through Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang, Selangor, Negeri Sembilan, and Johor on the peninsula, while simultaneously covering wide sections of Sarawak and Sabah, plus the federal territory of Labuan. When you lay these warnings side by side across just a few weeks of the calendar, what emerges isn't a single dramatic storm. It's a sustained, almost continuous pattern of severe convective weather rolling across the entire country, state by state, week after week. So, what's actually driving this? Malaysia's location is the starting point for understanding everything else. The country sits almost directly on the equator, a position that gives it one of the most consistently hot and humid climates on Earth, with warm ocean water surrounding it on nearly every side, the South China Sea to the east, the Strait of Malacca to the west, and the Sulu and Celebes seas around Sabah. That combination of intense heat, high humidity, and abundant moisture is exactly the fuel that thunderstorms need. Add in Malaysia's mountainous interior terrain, particularly the Titiwangsa mountain range running down the peninsula and the highlands of Sabah and Sarawak, and you get what meteorologists call orographic lifting. Air being forced upward as it moves over high ground, which cools it rapidly and triggers explosive cloud development. This is precisely why so many of these warnings specifically name highland and interior districts like Cameron Highlands, Guamusang, and the Pedalaman interior region of Sabah. The terrain itself is acting as a thunderstorm engine. There's also a seasonal piece to this story that matters. Malaysia doesn't experience the same 4-season pattern that much of the world does. Instead, its weather is governed primarily by 2 monsoon seasons. The southwest monsoon, which typically runs from around May through September, and the northeast monsoon, which dominates from around November through March. Right now, the country is deep in southwest monsoon season, a period that brings its own particular weather signature, generally drier conditions across the peninsula's west coast, but a significant increase in the frequency and intensity of afternoon and evening convective thunderstorms, especially across the interior and the eastern states, along with the Borneo states of Sabah and Sarawak, which sit exposed to moisture streaming in off the South China Sea. The repeated sweeping thunderstorm warnings we've seen through July and into August are almost a textbook signature of this exact seasonal pattern playing out at scale. Now, here's where this story gets genuinely more interesting than a routine seasonal rundown, and it's worth understanding clearly, because it explains why meteorologists in this region take these warnings more seriously than a casual observer might expect. For most of recorded meteorological history, Malaysia has been considered one of the safest countries on Earth from tropical cyclones, actual named storms, and typhoons, as opposed to the more generic thunderstorms this warning system is built around. The reason is simple physics. Tropical cyclones need what's called the Coriolis effect, the rotational force generated by the Earth's spin, to organize their circulation and spin up into an organized storm system. That force is essentially zero right at the equator and only becomes strong enough to reliably support tropical cyclone formation, several degrees of latitude away from it. Malaysia sits so close to the equator that, for generations, meteorologists consider the region essentially off-limits to true tropical cyclone formation, a rare geographic advantage that spared the country from the kind of typhoon devastation regularly seen in the Philippines, Vietnam, or southern China. That long-standing assumption was tested directly in an event that meteorologists have since studied closely. Earlier this year, researchers published a detailed scientific reanalysis of what they described as an unprecedented tropical cyclone, one that actually formed directly over the Strait of Malacca, the narrow, historically storm-sheltered waterway separating Malaysia's west coast from the island of Sumatra, at a latitude south of 5 degrees north of the equator. The storm, named Senyar, was documented as the first observed tropical cyclone in recorded history to form in that specific location and then track eastward into the South China Sea. It brought severe flooding and landslides across southern Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. According to the researchers, Senyar formed as part of a broader, highly active pattern in the region, occurring alongside two other tropical systems that were developing simultaneously nearby, one of which went on to become cyclonic storm Ditwa near Sri Lanka, and another that intensified into Typhoon Koto over the South China Sea. Taken together, Senyar and Ditwa were linked to more than 1,200 deaths across Sri Lanka, southern Thailand, and Indonesia due to catastrophic flooding and landslides driven by record-breaking rainfall, with roughly 1 million people evacuated across the affected region. That single event matters enormously for how meteorologists now think about weather risk in this part of the world. For decades, the assumption was that Malaysia's equatorial position made true cyclone formation essentially physically impossible this close to its shores. Senyar didn't invalidate the underlying physics. The Coriolis effect near the equator is still extremely weak, but it demonstrated that under the right combination of unusually warm ocean water and a favorable broader atmospheric pattern, the near impossible can still happen. It's the kind of low probability, high consequence event that changes how seriously forecasters treat every subsequent unusual weather signal in the region, even a fairly ordinary looking tropical depression. Which brings us to the other type of alert Met Malaysia has issued repeatedly this year, tropical depression advisories, distinct from the more common thunderstorm warnings, and specifically tied to weather systems forming out over open water in the South China Sea. These systems, even when they don't reach full tropical storm or typhoon strength, still pose a real and specific hazard to Malaysia, primarily to maritime activity and coastal communities, rather than to inland areas the way a landfalling cyclone would. Earlier this year, Met Malaysia issued an advisory for a tropical depression detected roughly 518 kilometers northwest of Muka, Sarawak, moving northeast, with sustained winds around 46 kilometers per hour. Advisories like this are specifically aimed at fishermen and vessels operating in Malaysian waters, warning of strong winds, rough seas, and the kind of sudden, disorganized, but genuinely dangerous weather that a developing tropical system throws off even before, or even without ever, becoming a fully organized storm. Similar tropical depressions have formed repeatedly in the northern South China Sea throughout 2026, with several explicitly forecast by regional meteorological agencies to potentially strengthen into full typhoons as they track toward southeastern China, Hainan Island, or northern Vietnam, systems that don't directly threaten Malaysia's coastline in most cases, but that meaningfully influence the broader wind and moisture patterns sweeping across the region, including into Malaysian airspace and waters. So where does that leave the actual practical picture for anyone in Malaysia watching these warnings roll across the country week after week? The honest answer is this: Malaysia's core geographic protection against catastrophic, direct landfall tropical cyclones remains fundamentally intact. Its position near the equator still makes it one of the least cyclone-exposed countries in the region compared to the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, or southern China, all of which sit in far more active tropical cyclone latitudes and face direct typhoon landfalls virtually every year. But the country is not entirely insulated from tropical systems either, as Senor demonstrated in dramatic fashion. And it faces a very real, very frequent, and genuinely dangerous hazard from something less dramatic sounding, but statistically far more consistent: severe convective thunderstorms tied to its monsoon seasons, capable of producing flash flooding, dangerous lightning, and destructive wind gusts on a near-weekly basis across wide stretches of the country. That distinction matters because it shapes what kind of preparedness actually makes sense here. This isn't a country that needs to build cyclone shelters and evacuation routes the way coastal Japan or the Philippines does, but it is a country where flash flooding tied to sudden intense thunderstorms represents a genuine and recurring risk, particularly in low-lying urban areas of cities like Kuala Lumpur, where rapid urbanization has reduced natural drainage capacity, and in the interior, highland regions, where sudden heavy rainfall on steep terrain can trigger landslides with very little warning. Met Malaysia's short-term 6-hour thunderstorm warning system exists precisely because these storms develop and become dangerous quickly, often with only an hour or two of genuine lead time between the first warning and the arrival of damaging rain and wind. For residents and travelers in any of the states currently or recently under warning, whether that's the peninsula's west coast, the eastern states like Kelantan, Terengganu, and Pahang, or across the South China Sea in Sarawak and Sabah, the practical guidance from meteorologists is consistent and worth repeating. Treat these thunderstorm warnings as genuine, near-term hazards rather than routine background noise, even though they occur frequently. Seek shelter indoors when a warning is active in your district, particularly avoiding open fields, elevated areas, and bodies of water where lightning risk is highest. If you're near rivers, streams, or in low-lying flood-prone neighborhoods, be aware that rainfall exceeding 20 millimeters an hour, the specific threshold that triggers these warnings, is genuinely capable of producing dangerous flash flooding within a very short window, sometimes less than an hour from the first heavy rain to significant water rise. And for anyone with maritime activity planned, whether that's fishing, ferry travel, or recreational boating, tropical depression advisories in the South China Sea should be checked directly through Met Malaysia's official channels before heading out, given how quickly these systems can intensify and how dangerous the resulting sea conditions can become, even without a storm ever making landfall. The bigger picture here is one worth understanding clearly, rather than sensationalizing. Malaysia is not facing an imminent typhoon, and nothing in the current pattern suggests a repeat of the extraordinary, once-in-a-generation circumstances that produced Storm Senyor earlier this year. What Malaysia is facing consistently through the heart of its southwest monsoon season is a sustained and genuinely serious pattern of severe convective weather, sweeping thunderstorm systems capable of producing intense rainfall, dangerous lightning, and damaging winds across wide sections of the country simultaneously, week after week, exactly as the country's geography and seasonal monsoon pattern would predict. That's a real and recurring hazard in its own right, one that has led to real flooding, real property damage, and real disruption to daily life across multiple Malaysian states throughout this summer, even without a single named storm ever making landfall. The lesson from Senyor, and honestly the lesson from every severe weather story we've covered, is the same one that applies here. Geography can reduce risk, but it rarely eliminates it entirely. And the moment a region becomes complacent because a certain kind of disaster has never happened there before is often the moment conditions quietly shift enough to make the near impossible happen anyway. Malaysia's equatorial position remains a genuine, meaningful advantage against the worst tropical cyclones this planet produces. But that advantage doesn't mean severe weather isn't a serious, ongoing part of life here. And the warnings rolling out across the country's states this week are the clearest evidence of that. If you're anywhere in Malaysia right now, particularly across the states currently or recently under thunderstorm warnings, stay alert to updates directly from Met Malaysia rather than relying on secondhand weather chatter. Take shelter promptly when a warning is issued for your district. And if you're near rivers, drainage-prone streets, or steep terrain, keep flash flooding specifically in mind, since it remains the most immediate and statistically likely hazard tied to this pattern. We'll keep tracking severe weather developments across Malaysia and the wider South China Sea region as this monsoon season continues. Subscribe so you don't miss updates. Drop a comment letting me know if you've experienced any of these storms firsthand, and stay safe out there. See you in the next one.